The text wasn't meant for her, but Caroline read it anyway. 8 months pregnant, 3 weeks from her due date. And her husband's phone just lit up with a message from another woman. "I can't wait to feel you inside me again. Last night was incredible." 6 months of lies, $23,000 stolen from their baby's college fund, and a diamond ring hidden in his mistress's apartment. He was planning to propose to her the day after Caroline gave birth. But here's what Derek didn't know. His pregnant wife, the woman he was about to abandon in a hospital bed with a newborn, her father was a billionaire, and Richard Ashford had been watching, waiting, preparing. The moment Derek walked out that door, he signed his own destruction. His career? Gone. His reputation? Destroyed. His mistress? She would become his wife's unexpected ally. But the real twist? It wasn't the revenge that saved Caroline. It was what she discovered about herself when everything fell apart. Lesson and value. This story proves one powerful truth. The people who betray you don't define your future. Your response does. Caroline didn't just survive her husband's betrayal. She transformed it into the foundation of a stronger life. Meaning of the story. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the doorways to our greatest growth. Caroline lost a cheating husband, but she gained something far more valuable: herself, her strength, her freedom, and a relationship with the father she thought she'd lost forever. The prison door was unlocked all along. She had been her own warden, and when she finally walked through it, she discovered that endings are just beginnings wearing a different mask. The text wasn't meant for her. But Caroline read it anyway. She had only reached for Derek's phone to check the weather forecast. A simple thing. The kind of thing wives do without thinking after 7 years of marriage. His phone sat on the nightstand, charging. Hers was somewhere in the living room, and she was 8 months pregnant, too tired to walk that far. The screen lit up as she touched it. A message notification appeared at the top. "I can't wait to feel you inside me again. Last night was incredible." Carolyn's breath stopped. The words blurred, then sharpened, then burned themselves into her brain. The message was signed with a single letter: V. Her hand trembled. The baby kicked, hard, as if sensing something was wrong. Derek lay beside her, sleeping, peaceful. His chest rose and fell in that familiar rhythm she had loved for 7 years. The same chest she had pressed her head against on their wedding night. The same chest that had held their secret when they first learned about the baby. The same chest that apparently pressed against someone else last night. Caroline unlocked his phone. Her fingerprint still worked. He had never thought to remove it. Why would he? She was his wife, his pregnant wife, the mother of his child. She scrolled through the messages. 6 months of them. Photos, plans, promises. "When are you going to tell her?" Vanessa had written 3 weeks ago. "Soon, baby, after the baby comes. I promise. After the baby comes." Caroline read those words again. After the baby comes. He was going to wait until she gave birth to their daughter, then leave her. That was his plan. That was what he had promised this woman. She scrolled further, found pictures. Vanessa was young, 28 maybe. Dark hair, red lips, the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. There were photos of Derek, too. Selfies in hotel rooms, his arm around Vanessa's bare shoulders, his wedding ring nowhere in sight. Caroline's stomach lurched. Morning sickness had ended months ago. This was something else entirely. She kept scrolling, found the hotel receipts Derek had forwarded, the restaurant reservations, the jewelry store confirmation, a necklace. $3,000, the same week he had told Caroline they needed to cut back on spending because of the baby. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. She couldn't stop her hands, couldn't make sense of what she was seeing, couldn't breathe. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Caroline placed the phone exactly where she had found it, positioned it perfectly, angled it just right. Then she lay back down, stared at the ceiling, counted her breaths. In, out, in, out. There was a crack in the ceiling she had never noticed before. It ran from the corner near the window to somewhere above Derek's side of the bed. How had she missed it? Had it always been there? Was she missing other things too? Of course she was. She had missed 6 months of her husband falling in love with someone else. The alarm went off at 6:30. Carolyn pretended to wake up, pretended to stretch, pretended that her world hadn't just shattered into 1,000 pieces. Derek kissed her forehead. He did that every morning, the same kiss he had given her since their honeymoon. Sleep well, beautiful? Beautiful. He still called her beautiful. Even while texting another woman that he couldn't wait to leave her. Caroline smiled. It felt like wearing a mask made of broken glass. Fine. Just tired. The baby was moving all night. She's going to be a soccer player. Derek grinned, that boyish grin she had fallen in love with at her cousin's wedding. The grin that had convinced her to give him her number, to go on that first date, to say yes when he proposed on the beach at sunset. The grin that apparently worked on other women too. He showered, got dressed, checked his phone and smiled at whatever he saw. Carolyn watched him from the bed, studied him like a stranger, tried to find some sign of the lie, some crack in the facade. He looked exactly the same. That was the worst part. Working late tonight, Derek said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Don't wait up. Working late. The same excuse from 100 nights, the same lie dressed up in business casual. Caroline nodded. Of course, I'll save you some dinner. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, his double life. Love you, he called from the doorway. The door closed behind him. Caroline made it to the bathroom before she vomited. She knelt on the cold tile floor, gripping the toilet, heaving until there was nothing left. The baby pressed against her bladder. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. 7 years. She had given him 7 years of her life, and he was going to throw it all away for a woman named V. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. The tile was cool against her legs. The morning light crept across the floor in slow, golden streaks. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. A car started. The world kept spinning as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed. Carolyn pressed her hand against her belly, felt the baby move, a tiny elbow or knee pushing against her palm. It's just us now, she whispered. Just us. She had 48 hours before she confronted him. 48 hours to decide what kind of woman she wanted to be. The kind who cried and begged and asked what she did wrong, or the kind who burned it all down. She chose the second. Jenna answered on the first ring. That was one of the things Caroline loved about her best friend. She always answered, no matter what. It's 7 in the morning, Jenna said. Someone better be dying. Derek is cheating on me. Silence. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 10. I'm on my way. Jenna arrived in 23 minutes. She lived 40 minutes away. Caroline didn't ask how she had managed it. She didn't need to. That was Jenna, a nurse who ran toward emergencies instead of away from them. She came bearing gifts, pregnancy-safe chamomile tea, a box of tissues, and murder in her dark brown eyes. Tell me everything, Caroline told her. The text message, the photos, the 6 months of lies, the plan to leave after the baby came. By the time she finished, Jenna's knuckles were white around her coffee cup. Who is she? Someone named Vanessa. I don't know her last name. Jenna's face changed. Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition. Describe her. Caroline pulled up the photos on her own phone. She had forwarded them to herself last night. Evidence. Ammunition. Jenna looked at the screen. Her jaw tightened. I know her. What? Vanessa Cole. 28. Marketing associate at Morrison Tech. Jenna set down her coffee. I treated her at the hospital last month. She came in with a panic attack. Spent an hour crying about a married man who promised to leave his wife for her. The coffee Caroline had been drinking turned to acid in her stomach. She knows he's married. She knows everything, she just doesn't care. Caroline stared at the photos again. Vanessa's smile. Derek's arm around her. The hotel room behind them. How long have you known? I didn't know it was Derek, I swear. She never said his name, just called him her soulmate. Jenna reached across the table, took Caroline's hand. Honey, I would have told you if I knew. Caroline believed her. Jenna didn't keep secrets, not from her. What do I do? First, you document everything. Screenshots, bank statements, hotel receipts, anything you can find. Then what? Jenna's eyes hardened. Then you make him regret the day he was born. The next 2 days passed in a blur of evidence gathering. Caroline waited until Derek left for work. Then she searched. She found the credit card statements first. 8 charges at the Hotel Marmont. Each one on a night Derek had claimed to be working late. $312 per stay. $2,496 total. She found the jewelry store receipt. Not 1 necklace. 3, plus a bracelet, plus earrings. Nearly $12,000 in gifts for a woman who wasn't his wife. She found the restaurant reservations. The wine club membership he had bought for 2. The weekend getaway to Napa she had never heard about. But the worst discovery came on the second day. Their savings account. The one they had been building for 5 years. The one meant to pay for the baby's delivery. The baby's first year of daycare. The baby's college fund someday. Half of it was gone. $23,000. Transferred to an account she didn't recognize. Over the past 4 months. Caroline sat at the kitchen table. Stared at the numbers on her laptop screen. Felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't just being cheated on. She was being robbed. He had taken their baby's future and spent it on his mistress. The anger came then, pure and clean and bright. It burned away the sadness, burned away the confusion, left nothing but a diamond-hard certainty. He would pay for this, one way or another. Derek came home that night with flowers, yellow roses, her favorite. He had remembered. No, he had felt guilty. There was a difference. "These are beautiful," Carolyn said. She put them in water, arranged them on the counter, played the part of the grateful wife. "I've been working so hard lately. I feel like I've been neglecting you." Neglecting. That was one word for it. "We need to talk," Caroline said. Derek froze. Just for a half second. Just long enough for her to see the fear flash across his face. "About what, sweetheart?" She slid his phone across the table. The screen was open to the text messages. 6 months of evidence glowing in the dim kitchen light. "About Vanessa." The color drained from his face, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Caroline, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you've been sleeping with a 28-year-old for 6 months? Can you explain why you promised to leave me after I give birth to your child? Can you explain where $23,000 went?" His shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. And something worse took its place. Relief. He was relieved she knew. Relieved he didn't have to pretend anymore. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. He sat down across from her, reached for her hands. She pulled away. "But it did happen. You made it happen. Every lie. Every hotel room. Every dollar you stole from our daughter's future. I wasn't stealing. I was going to pay it back." "When? After you left me for her?" Derek ran his hands through his hair. That gesture she used to find endearing. Now it just looked pathetic. "Caroline, I need to be honest with you. I've fallen in love with Vanessa." The words hung in the air between them. Heavy. Final, like a door slamming shut. You're leaving me. I'll take care of you financially. The baby will be provided for. I'm not a monster. She laughed. The sound was foreign, sharp, nothing like joy. You're leaving your 8 months pregnant wife for your 28-year-old mistress. You stole our savings to buy her jewelry. You were planning to abandon me in a hospital bed with a newborn so you could start your new life. She leaned forward, let him see the fury in her eyes. What would you call yourself if not a monster? He didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. I'm not crazy. I saw the evidence. I read the messages. This is real. This is happening. And I will survive it. Derek moved out 3 days later. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, his gym equipment. He left behind 7 years of memories. Wedding photos still hung on the walls. His grandmother's recipe box sat untouched in the kitchen. The pregnancy books he had bought when they first found out sat unread on the nightstand. Caroline watched him pack, watched him carry boxes to his car, watched him drive away to wherever Vanessa lived. Then she closed the door, locked it, leaned against it until her legs gave out. She slid to the floor. 8 months pregnant, alone, terrified, but not broken. Not yet. What she didn't know was that her father was watching. He had been watching for months, and Derek had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Caroline hadn't spoken to her father in 7 years. Not since he chose his business empire over her mother's cancer treatment. Not since he missed her wedding because of a merger in Tokyo. Not since he became a stranger wearing her father's face, Richard Ashford. The name appeared in business magazines and financial news. A billionaire who had built his fortune on strategic acquisitions and ruthless efficiency. A man who could buy and sell companies the way normal people bought groceries. A man who had forgotten he had a daughter. So, when the black town car pulled up outside her apartment building, Caroline assumed it was a mistake. Some wealthy stranger looking for a different address. Until Richard Ashford stepped out. He was older, grayer at the temples, more lines around his eyes. But those eyes, that sharp blue gaze that could make boardrooms fall silent. Her eyes. She had inherited them from him. Caroline. She stood in the doorway, 8 months pregnant, wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, looking nothing like the daughter of a billionaire. How did you find me? I've always known where you were. I've been keeping track, even when you didn't want me to. That sounds like stalking. That sounds like a father who made mistakes and didn't know how to fix them. They stood there for a long moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. A woman walked by with a stroller. A delivery truck rumbled past, normal life continuing all around them. "Can I come in?" Richard asked. Caroline should have said no. Should have closed the door and pretended he didn't exist. The way he had pretended she didn't exist when her mother needed him most. But something in his voice, something she hadn't heard in years, vulnerability. "Fine, but I'm not making you coffee." The nursery was half-painted, soft lavender on 2 walls, primer white on the other 2. Derek had promised to finish it, one of 1,000 promises he would never keep. Richard stood in the center of the room, looked at the crib, the mobile with stars and moons, the rocking chair Carolyn's mother had used when she was a baby. "Your mother called me," he said, 3 days ago. She told me about Derek." "Mom talked to you?" "She forgave me. I don't know why or how, but she called and she told me what was happening, and she said—" He paused, swallowed. "She said you needed your father, even if you didn't know it." Carolyn sank into the rocking chair. The baby shifted inside her. Restless. 7 years. You missed my wedding, my graduation, my promotion, every holiday, every birthday. Her voice cracked. "And now you show up because Mom made a phone call?" "I show up because your husband made a mistake. A very public one. Richard turned to face her. His mistress works for a company I'm in the process of acquiring. The words took a moment to register. You're acquiring Derek's company? Morrison Tech has been struggling for 2 years. Bradley Morrison has been quietly looking for investors. I positioned myself as the solution about 4 months ago. 4 months ago, before you knew about the affair. Richard nodded. But once I learned about Vanessa Cole, once I discovered what Derek was doing to my daughter, the acquisition took on a different purpose. Caroline stared at her father, tried to reconcile the man standing before her with the ghost who had haunted her childhood, the father who worked 100-hour weeks, who missed recitals and soccer games, who loved his empire more than his family. Why do you care? You haven't cared about anything but money for 20 years. I cared. I just didn't know how to show it. I thought providing was enough. I thought success was love. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, like he used to sit when she was a little girl, and he would read her bedtime stories, before the company, before the billions, before everything fell apart. I was wrong about everything. The mobile turned slowly overhead, stars and moons spinning in an endless circle. Derek was going to leave me in the hospital, Caroline said quietly, right after I gave birth. He was going to propose to her the same day. Richard's jaw tightened. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I know. I've had investigators looking into him. I know about the hotels, the jewelry, the money he stole from your accounts. He paused. I know he's been telling Vanessa that you knew about the affair, that you had an open marriage, that you were planning to divorce anyway. The lies. Layer upon layer of lies. Caroline felt like she was drowning in them. What do you want from me? I want to help you, but I need to know this is what you want. Richard leaned forward. I can destroy Derek professionally. I can make sure he never works in this industry again. I can recover every dollar he stole and make him pay for what he did to you. And what do you get out of it? A chance to be your father again, even if it takes another 7 years to earn it. Caroline closed her eyes, felt the baby kick against her ribs, remembered all the times she had needed her father and he wasn't there. But he was here now, sitting on the floor of her unfinished nursery, offering her the one thing she hadn't been able to give herself, power. He spent our savings on her, Caroline said. $23,000. Money that was supposed to be for our daughter. I know. He was going to propose to her while I was still in the recovery room. I know that too. He made me feel like I was losing my mind for months. Every time I asked if something was wrong, he told me I was being paranoid, that pregnancy hormones were making me crazy. Richard's hands curled into fists. That's called gaslighting, and it's a form of abuse. Caroline opened her eyes, looked at her father, really looked. He was old, tired, carrying the weight of decades of regret. But underneath all of that, underneath the expensive suit and the silver hair and the billionaire facade, he was just a man who had failed his daughter and was trying to make it right. Destroy him. Richard nodded, slowly, deliberately. Consider it done. He stood up, brushed off his pants, extended his hand to help her out of the rocking chair. There's something else you should know, he said. Derek has secrets you haven't uncovered yet. Secrets that go back further than Vanessa. Further than your marriage. What kind of secrets? The kind that make my revenge look like mercy. He didn't explain further. Just kissed her forehead. The first time he had touched her in 7 years. Get some rest. Take care of my granddaughter. And try to trust me. Just this once. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. The emotional weight of the past few days pressing down on her like a physical force. "I'll try," she said. It was the most she could offer. It was enough. Derek's world began to crumble on a Tuesday. It started small. His corporate credit card declined at lunch with Vanessa, an embarrassing moment he laughed off and covered with his personal card. The next day, his access badge failed at the parking garage. "Just a glitch," security said. They fixed it right away. But Derek noticed the way the guard looked at him. Something knowing. Something cold. On Thursday, his calendar filled with mysterious meetings. Budget reviews he hadn't requested. Performance evaluations that weren't scheduled for another 3 months. By Friday, Derek Matthews knew something was very wrong. Bradley Morrison called him into his office at 4:15 in the afternoon. The CEO's corner office with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Derek had dreamed of sitting in that office someday, had planned his entire career around that goal. Now he stood before Bradley's desk like a schoolboy called to the principal. "Close the door," Bradley said. "Sit down." Derek obeyed. His palms were sweating. His heart raced. He couldn't remember the last time he felt this nervous. "We've had some concerns raised," Bradley said, "about your expense reports." "My expense reports?" 8 hotel stays at the Marmont, charged to your corporate card. "Care to explain?" Derek's mouth went dry. "Those were for client meetings. Late nights, when it didn't make sense to drive home." "Were they?" Bradley opened a folder on his desk, slid photographs across the polished wood. "Because these photos suggest otherwise." Derek looked down, saw himself, Vanessa, a hotel room, his arm around her bare shoulders. "Where did you get these?" "That's not really the question you should be asking." Bradley leaned back in his chair. "The question you should be asking is whether Richard Ashford is going to let you walk out of this building with your reputation intact." The blood drained from Derek's face. "Ashford? As in Caroline's father? You didn't know?" "Know what?" Bradley smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "Your estranged father-in-law is in the process of acquiring this company. He's been conducting very thorough due diligence. Very thorough indeed." The room tilted. Derek gripped the armrests of his chair, tried to process what he was hearing. Richard Ashford, the billionaire, the corporate raider who had destroyed a dozen companies and rebuilt them in his image. The man Derek had never met because Caroline refused to speak to him. That man was acquiring Morrison Tech. "I didn't know Caroline's father was in business." "Then you didn't do your homework." Bradley closed the folder. "The jewelry, the hotels, the weekend trips, all charged to company accounts. That's grounds for termination, for cause, no severance, no reference." "Bradley, please, I can explain everything." "Can you? Can you explain why you've been using company resources to fund an extramarital affair while your wife is 8 months pregnant with your child?" Bradley shook his head. "I have a daughter, Derek. If any man did to her what you've done to Caroline Ashford, I would want him destroyed." "Morrison, she's not Caroline Ashford. She's Caroline Matthews. She hasn't spoken to her father in 7 years." "Well," Bradley stood up, walked to the window, gazed out at the city below. "It seems they've reconciled." The termination letter arrived 3 days later. Derek opened it in his new apartment. The one-bedroom rental Vanessa had found for them. The one that smelled like fresh paint and broken promises. Terminated for cause. No severance, no reference. Immediate surrender of all company property. His career at Morrison Tech. 8 years of climbing, of networking, of careful political maneuvering. Gone in a single paragraph. Derek called Caroline, the first time since he had moved out. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was calm, steady. Nothing like the sobbing mess he had expected. "What did you tell your father?" "The truth." "Caroline, this is my career. This is everything I've worked for. And I was your wife. Lily is your daughter. Were we everything you worked for?" "This isn't fair," she laughed. That cold sound he had heard the night of the confrontation. "You want to talk about fair? You stole $23,000 from our savings. You spent it on jewelry and hotel rooms for your mistress. You were planning to leave me alone in a hospital with a newborn while you proposed to another woman." Her voice hardened. "Your career seems like a fair trade. You don't understand. I could lose everything." "Now you know how I feel." She hung up. Derek stood in his empty apartment, holding his dead phone, listening to the silence. He had lost his job. He was about to lose his industry reputation, and somehow, impossibly, he was about to lose much more. Because Richard Ashford was just getting started. Caroline sat in her father's office 3 days later, a corner suite on the 42nd floor of Ashford Tower, windows on two sides overlooking the city like a king surveying his kingdom. Thomas Whitfield, Richard's attorney, spread documents across the conference table. "The affair began 8 months ago," Thomas said. "Not 6, as Derek claimed." Caroline's hand went to her belly. 8 months. Before she even knew she was pregnant. "He knew about Lily before I did." "He told Vanessa 2 days before he told you. She helped him process the news, comforted him through his anxiety about becoming a father." The words hit like physical blows. Derek had shared the most important moment of their lives with another woman first. "There's more," Thomas continued. "The jewelry you found, the necklaces and bracelets, those weren't the only purchases." He slid a photo across the table. A diamond ring. Elegant. Expensive. The kind of ring that said forever. "We found this in Vanessa Cole's apartment. Derek bought it 3 months ago. He was planning to propose to her the day after your due date." Caroline stared at the photo. The diamond sparkled even in the flat image. Beautiful. Heartless. He was going to propose while she was recovering from childbirth, while she was learning to breastfeed their daughter, while she was bleeding and exhausted and wondering where her husband had gone. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass, looked out at all the tiny people living their tiny lives. None of them knew her world was ending. None of them cared. "The financial investigation revealed additional irregularities," Thomas continued. "Derek has been skimming from your joint accounts for nearly 3 years. Not just the 23,000 you discovered. We've identified an additional 47,000 in unauthorized transfers. $70,000. Gone. Vanished into Derek's secret life. Where did it go? Gambling debts. Poor investments. And yes, the affair. Vanessa Cole has expensive tastes." Richard spoke for the first time. "The money will be recovered, all of it, plus interest, plus damages." "How?" "Derek's family has assets, his mother's house, his trust fund from his grandfather. We've already begun legal proceedings." Caroline turned from the window, looked at her father and his attorney. 2 men in expensive suits dismantling her husband's life piece by piece. She should feel guilty, should feel some sympathy for the man she had loved. But all she felt was cold satisfaction. "What happens next?" Richard smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Now we destroy his reputation." Derek's phone calls went unanswered. His interview requests were canceled. His LinkedIn connections began disappearing one by one. Someone was making calls, quiet conversations with industry leaders, whispered warnings about Derek Matthews and his ethics problems. Within 2 weeks, Derek was unhireable. He applied to 37 positions, received 37 rejections. No one would even take a meeting. One night, drunk on cheap bourbon, he called Caroline again. "Please," he begged, "call him off, your father. Tell him to stop." "Why would I do that?" "Because you loved me once. Because I'm Lily's father. Because this is destroying my life." Caroline sat in her nursery. The walls were finally painted, soft lavender all around. The mobile turned slowly overhead, stars and moons in an endless dance. "You destroyed your own life, Derek. The day you decided your family wasn't enough. The day you chose a 28-year-old over your pregnant wife. The day you stole our daughter's college fund to buy earrings. I made a mistake. You made 1,000 mistakes every day for 3 years, every lie, every hotel room, every dollar. Caroline, please. She looked at the crib, imagined her daughter sleeping there, safe, loved, protected. Goodbye, Derek. She hung up, blocked his number, and felt absolutely nothing. I deserved to feel this satisfaction, the righteous anger, the cold joy of watching him suffer. I'm not a bad person for wanting him to hurt. He hurt me first. He hurt me for years. This is just balance being restored. The nursery was quiet, the mobile turned, and somewhere across the city, Derek Matthews was learning that actions have consequences, especially when your wife's father is a billionaire. Vanessa Cole appeared at Caroline's door on a Sunday afternoon. No warning, no phone call, just a knock that interrupted Caroline's attempt at a nap. She opened the door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, she found the other woman. Vanessa looked different from the photos. Smaller somehow, less confident. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying. "I know I shouldn't be here," Vanessa said, "but I need to talk to you." Caroline should have slammed the door, should have called the police, should have done anything except what she actually did. "Come inside." They sat in the living room. Two women who should have been enemies, separated by a coffee table and the wreckage of their shared mistake. "He lied to me," Vanessa said, "about everything." "What do you mean?" "He told me you knew about us, that you had an arrangement, an open marriage. He said you were planning to divorce anyway, that the pregnancy was an accident you both regretted." The lies, always more lies. "We were trying to get pregnant for 2 years, Caroline said. Lily was planned, wanted, celebrated." Vanessa's face crumbled. "He told me you got pregnant on purpose, to trap him, to keep him from leaving." "And you believed him?" "I believed everything." Vanessa wiped her eyes. "He said you were cold, distant, that you hadn't been intimate in years, that you treated him like a roommate, not a husband." Caroline thought about all the nights Derek had claimed to be too tired, all the times he had turned away from her in bed, all the excuses that had made her feel unwanted and undesirable. He had been saving himself for Vanessa, and telling Vanessa it was Caroline's fault. "What else did he tell you about me?" Vanessa hesitated. "That your father was dangerous, violent, that he had to protect me from Richard Ashford." Caroline laughed. Actually laughed. The irony was too perfect. "My father is many things, absent, obsessive, emotionally unavailable. But violent?" She shook her head. "Derek was afraid of my father because my father has money and power and the ability to destroy him. I know that now." Vanessa pulled something from her purse, a small velvet box. "He proposed to me 3 days ago, got down on one knee in our apartment, told me he was free now, that the divorce was final, that we could finally be together." "The divorce isn't final. I haven't even filed yet." "I know. I checked the court records." Vanessa opened the box. Inside was the diamond ring from Thomas's photos. Beautiful, expensive, a symbol of everything wrong with Derek Matthews. "He asked me to marry him using money he stole from your baby's college fund." Caroline stared at the ring, at the woman holding it, at the complete absurdity of this moment. Two women, betrayed by the same man, sitting in the same room, having the most surreal conversation of their lives. "Why are you here, Vanessa? Really?" "Because I need to know if any of it was real." Vanessa's voice broke. "Did he ever love me? Or was I just an escape from a life he didn't want? Another victim of his lies?" Caroline considered the question, thought about Derek, about who he was when she met him, about who he had become. "I don't think Derek knows how to love anyone," she said finally. "I think he loves the way love feels in the beginning." the excitement, the chase. But when that fades, when real life sets in, he runs. He finds someone new, someone who makes him feel special again. So I was just a distraction. We both were. You, me, probably women before us that neither of us know about. Caroline sighed. Derek doesn't want a partner. He wants an audience, someone to applaud while he plays the leading man. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, processing, grieving, understanding. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for everything I did, for believing his lies, for not questioning why a married man with a pregnant wife was spending his nights with me. You should have questioned it. I know. You should have walked away the moment you found out I existed. I know that too." Caroline looked at the other woman, saw the pain, the regret, the dawning realization that she had been a pawn in Derek's game just like everyone else. And something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But understanding. "Keep the ring," Caroline said. "Sell it. Use the money to start over somewhere far away from Derek Matthews." Vanessa stared at her. "You're not angry?" "I'm furious. At him. At the situation. At the universe for putting us in this mess." Caroline stood up, walked to the window, watched the late afternoon sun paint the city gold. "But being angry at you doesn't help me. It doesn't change what happened. It just keeps me trapped in the past." "What will you do now? Have my baby? Raise my daughter? Build a life that doesn't include cheating husbands or other women or any of this chaos?" She turned back to Vanessa. "What will you do?" Vanessa closed the ring box, slipped it back into her purse. "Leave. Get as far away from here as I can. Try to forget I ever met Derek Matthews." "Good luck with that. You too." Vanessa left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Caroline stood alone in her living room, processing the strangest conversation of her life. Her husband's mistress had just apologized, had just revealed the depth of Derek's deception, had just confirmed what Caroline had suspected all along. Derek was a liar, a thief, a manipulator, and now, finally, everyone knew it. But there was no satisfaction in the knowledge, just exhaustion, and the dull ache of betrayal that never quite went away. She went to bed early that night, slept fitfully, dreamed of shadows and lies and diamond rings that sparkled like broken promises, and woke to the worst pain she had ever felt. The contractions started at 3:17 in the morning. Caroline's first thought was that it couldn't be labor. She still had 3 weeks until her due date. 3 weeks of waiting and preparing and trying to figure out how to be a single mother. But the pain didn't care about schedules. It ripped through her abdomen like lightning, white hot, blinding, unlike anything she had experienced before. She grabbed her phone, called Derek. Habit, desperation. The baby's father should be here for this. No answer. She called Jenna, voicemail. She called her mother, 1,200 miles away in Phoenix, crying, apologizing, unable to get a flight until morning. She sat alone on the edge of her bed, breathing through the pain, counting seconds between contractions, watching the numbers get smaller and smaller, 8 minutes apart, 7 minutes, 6, too fast. Something was wrong. Caroline called the one person she never thought she would call. Richard answered on the second ring. "Dad?" The word felt foreign in her mouth. "Something's wrong. The baby." "I'm on my way." He arrived in 11 minutes. She timed it through the contractions. 11 minutes from a penthouse across the city to her modest apartment in the suburbs. He must have broken every traffic law in existence. Richard helped her to the car, drove like a man possessed, called ahead to the hospital, called her obstetrician, Called someone named Thomas to cancel all his morning meetings. "You'll be fine," he kept saying. "You'll both be fine." She wanted to believe him, but the pain was getting worse, and the baby wasn't moving like she should. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and cold instruments and nurses moving too fast. Carolyn lay on a gurney while strangers surrounded her with concerned faces and medical jargon she couldn't understand. "The baby is in distress." 3 words. A universe of fear. "What does that mean?" Caroline gasped. "What's happening?" "The umbilical cord is compressed. Your baby isn't getting enough oxygen. We need to do an emergency cesarean right now." Everything happened at once. Consent forms, an IV in her arm, cold gel on her swollen belly, doctors in surgical masks speaking in calm voices that didn't match the urgency in their eyes. Richard stood in the doorway, looking more afraid than she had ever seen him. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not leaving." They wouldn't let him in the operating room. He wasn't the father, wasn't listed on any of her forms, just a stranger claiming to be family. So Caroline went under alone. Her last sight before the anesthesia took hold was a ceiling full of surgical lights. Her last thought was a prayer she didn't know she still remembered. "Please, let her be okay. Take everything else. But let my daughter live." Darkness. Then sound. A cry, small and fierce and absolutely alive. "She's beautiful." Jenna's voice, coming from somewhere far away. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect in every way. Caroline opened her eyes. The recovery room was soft, quiet, sunlight streaming through half-closed blinds. And there, wrapped in a pink blanket, held in the arms of a nurse, her daughter. "Lily." The name came out as a whisper. "Her name is Lily," named after her grandmother, the woman who never gave up on anyone. The nurse placed the baby in Caroline's arms, tiny, warm, real. Lily's eyes opened, dark and curious and full of new life. Caroline looked at her daughter, at this miracle she had made, at this person who didn't know anything about cheating husbands or lying fathers or the chaos that had surrounded her birth. And in that moment, none of it mattered. Not Derek, not the affair, not the money or the revenge, or any of the darkness. Just this, just her, just the two of them starting something new. "Hi, baby girl," Caroline whispered. "I'm your mama, and I promise, I will never let anyone hurt you." Lily yawned, tiny pink lips in a perfect circle. And Caroline cried. Not from sadness, not from pain, from something she couldn't name. Something between relief and joy, and the overwhelming weight of unconditional love. Richard visited later that day. He stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the baby like she might break if he got too close. "She looks like you," he said. "Same stubborn chin. She has Derek's eyes. We'll forgive her for that." Caroline almost smiled. Almost. "I was alone when they took me to surgery. I was completely alone." Richard nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes suspiciously bright. "That will never happen again, I promise you. Whatever you need, whatever Lily needs, I will be there. Even if it takes another 7 years to earn it. Even then." He sat down in the chair beside her bed, watched his granddaughter sleep, said nothing for a long time. And somehow that silence was more comforting than any words could have been. Derek found out about Lily's birth from the hospital records, public information. Anyone could access it with the right search terms. He showed up 3 days later, the day Caroline was supposed to go home. He appeared in the hallway outside her room, holding flowers, looking lost. "I want to see her," he said. "She's my daughter, too." Caroline looked at the man she had married, at the stranger he had become. "You weren't there. When I went into emergency surgery. When I didn't know if she would survive. When I woke up alone and terrified. I didn't know. Because you weren't there to know. Caroline, please. She could have said no. Could have had security escort him out. Could have denied him access to the child he had already betrayed. But Lily needed a father. Even a flawed one. Even one who had to earn back every ounce of trust. 10 minutes. Supervised. Then you leave. Derek held his daughter for the first time in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. He cried, said all the right things, made all the right promises. But Caroline watched his eyes, watched them flick to his phone when it buzzed, watched the calculation behind his tears. He was already thinking about how this looked, how it would play in court, how he could use this moment to his advantage. Some things never changed. Time's up, Caroline said. Derek kissed Lily's forehead, handed her back to her mother, walked toward the door. I'm going to fight for her, he said, for custody, for visitation. I'm not just going to disappear. I know. This isn't over, Caroline. She looked down at her daughter, at the perfect face and the tiny fingers and all the possibilities sleeping in her arms. No, she said quietly. It's not. But for the first time in months, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Derek left without another word, and Caroline went home with her daughter to start the next chapter of her life, alone, but not broken, never broken. 3 weeks of motherhood taught Caroline things about herself she never knew. She could function on 2 hours of sleep. She could change a diaper in complete darkness. She could love someone so fiercely it felt like her heart would burst. But she also learned something else, something harder. She couldn't do this entirely alone. Richard showed up every afternoon at 4 o'clock, like clockwork, like a schedule he had programmed into his billionaire brain. He would hold Lily while Caroline showered, actually showered. With hot water and soap and the luxury of 10 minutes without a crying infant. He was terrible at it. Held the baby like she might explode. Spoke to her in the same voice he probably used for board meetings. The quarterly earnings are looking strong, he would say to his 3-week-old granddaughter. Market conditions suggest a bullish trend through Q4. Lily would stare at him with those dark eyes. Unimpressed, unaware, perfect. She doesn't care about earnings, Caroline said one afternoon. Everyone should care about earnings. She's 3 weeks old. Early education is important. Caroline laughed. A real laugh. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had made that sound. Richard looked up from the baby. Something shifted in his expression, softer, almost vulnerable. That's the first time I've heard you laugh in years. That's the first time I've had something to laugh about in years. They sat in comfortable silence. The apartment was clean, the dishes were done. The nursery was finally completely finished. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. I need to tell you something, Richard said. About Derek. What now? Vanessa left him 3 weeks ago, right after your conversation with her. Caroline processed this information, felt the expected satisfaction, then felt something else underneath. Emptiness. Good for her. She sent him a letter, explaining why, detailing all the lies he told her about you. Richard adjusted Lily in his arms. He showed up at her apartment drunk, made a scene. The neighbors called the police. Is she okay? She's fine. She's already moved to Seattle. New job, new life. Caroline looked out the window. The city stretched before her. Millions of people living millions of lives. And somewhere out there, Derek Matthews was finally facing the consequences of his choices. What about his job search? Still nothing. No one will touch him. The word is out. Derek Matthews is toxic. She should feel triumph, should feel vindicated, should feel something. but all she felt was tired. "Is that what you wanted?" she asked. "Complete destruction?" Richard considered the question, set the baby gently in her bassinet, sat down across from his daughter. "I wanted him to understand what he did, to feel even a fraction of the pain he caused you." He paused. "But revenge is complicated. It doesn't fill the hole, doesn't undo the damage, doesn't change the past." "Then why did we do it?" "Because sometimes destruction is necessary before you can rebuild. Sometimes people need to see consequences before they can change." Richard leaned forward. "And sometimes a father needs to protect his daughter, even if it's decades too late." Carolyn looked at this man, her father, the stranger who had become something else over the past weeks. Not quite family yet, but closer than they had been in years. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us, about what happens next. And I'm not ready to forgive you. For Mom, for missing my wedding, for all the years you chose work over me. I understand. But I'm ready to try. To let you be part of Lily's life. Part of my life, whatever that looks like." Richard's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly, looked away. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably. I'll take it anyway." Lily stirred in her bassinet, made those small sounds that meant she was waking up. That meant she would need to be fed in approximately 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Caroline had learned to count, to anticipate, to prepare. Motherhood had made her efficient. Exhaustion had stripped away everything unnecessary. "There's something else," Richard said, "about Derek's past. I thought the investigation was finished. The financial investigation, yes, but Thomas found something else." Richard pulled a folder from his briefcase. The man still used briefcases. "3 years ago, Derek was involved with another woman, before you were married." Carolyn's blood ran cold. "3 years ago, we were engaged." "I know." She took the folder, opened it, read the contents. Emily Hartman, 26 at the time, a colleague at Derek's previous job. 6 months of secret meetings, weekend trips disguised as conferences, thousands of dollars in gifts and dinners and hotels. The affair ended when Emily demanded Derek leave Carolyn. He refused, said he wasn't ready, said he loved both of them. Emily quit her job, moved to another state, disappeared, and Derek married Carolyn 3 months later. "He cheated on me before we were even married," Caroline said. The words felt numb, distant. "The whole time we were planning the wedding, the whole time we were saying our vows, he was comparing me to someone else. I'm sorry. Sorry that he did it, or sorry that I'm just finding out now?" "Both." Caroline closed the folder, set it on the table, looked at her sleeping daughter. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage was a lie. Not just the past 6 months, the past 7 years. Derek had never been faithful, had never been honest, had never been the man she thought she married, and somehow this revelation set her free, because if the marriage had always been broken, then she hadn't failed. She hadn't missed signs she should have seen. She had simply been deceived by a master manipulator. It wasn't her fault. It had never been her fault. "I need you to do something for me," Caroline said. "Anything. Stop the revenge. Stop the professional destruction. Stop whatever else you have planned." Richard frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm done letting Derek Matthews control my emotions. Done giving him power over my peace. Done being the woman who waits for vengeance to make her feel better." Caroline stood up, walked to the window, watched the sun set over the city. "He destroyed his own life. I don't need to help him." "What about Justice?" "Justice happened. He lost his job, lost his reputation, lost Vanessa, lost me and Lily." She turned to face her father. "What more is there to take?" Richard studied his daughter, looking for something, finding it. "You're stronger than I realized." I've had to be. He nodded, slowly, understanding. I'll call off the investigation, the professional blacklist, all of it. He stood up, gathered his briefcase. But Caroline, if he ever hurts you again, if he ever threatens you or Lily, the gloves come off. I know. And I won't apologize for that. I wouldn't expect you to. He kissed her forehead, the same gesture from weeks ago, but different now, more familiar. Good night, sweetheart. Sweetheart. He used to call her that when she was little, before the company, before everything changed. Good night, Dad. Dad. The word came easier this time, still strange, but less foreign. Richard left. The door closed behind him, and Caroline was alone with her daughter and the quiet truth she had finally accepted. She couldn't change the past, couldn't undo Derek's betrayals, couldn't erase the pain or the lies or the years of deception. But she could choose who she wanted to become. Not a victim, not an avenger, something else entirely. Herself. Finally. Completely. Herself. 6 months passed like water through her fingers. Lily grew from a sleeping bundle to a crawling tornado. Rolling over, sitting up, reaching for everything within arm's length with tiny, determined fingers. Caroline returned to work. Part-time consulting from home. Marketing strategies and brand development for small businesses. Using skills she had forgotten she possessed. Her apartment transformed into something new. Pictures of Derek disappeared from the walls, replaced by photos of Lily, of Caroline and Lily, of Richard holding his granddaughter with something approaching competence. The divorce proceedings moved forward, custody arrangements, asset division, the cold legal language of a marriage ending. Derek got supervised visitation, every other Saturday, 2 hours at a neutral location with a court-appointed monitor. He showed up most of the time, played with Lily, made the same promises he always made, said he was changing, growing, becoming a better man. Caroline listened, nodded, said nothing, because she had learned to watch, to see past the words to the truth underneath. And the truth was that Derek Matthews was struggling. He had taken a job in retail, a cell phone store at the mall, commission-based, minimum wage floor, a far cry from his corner office at Morrison Tech. He lived with his mother now, Grace Matthews, the woman who had known about the affair and said nothing. Carolyn still hadn't forgiven Grace, probably never would, but she had stopped hating her, stopped hating any of them. Hatred was too heavy, too exhausting, too much energy spent on people who didn't deserve it. Instead, she focused on building, on growing, on becoming. And slowly, carefully, she began to heal. Richard invited her to dinner at his penthouse. Formal, important, something he needed to discuss. She arrived at 7 with Lily in her arms. The penthouse was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Art on the walls that probably cost more than her annual salary. But the most surprising thing was the photos, pictures of her, as a baby, as a toddler, as an awkward teenager with braces and too much eyeliner. He had kept them, all these years, through all the silence and distance. He had kept her. I have a proposition, Richard said over dinner. A business opportunity. I'm listening. The Ashford Foundation, our charitable arm, education initiatives, poverty reduction, community development. He set down his fork. I need someone to run it, someone who understands people, someone who cares about more than profit margins. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Carolyn looked around the penthouse, at the wealth and power her father had accumulated, at the life he had built while neglecting his family. I don't want your charity. This isn't charity. This is recognition of your skills, your potential, the person you've become. despite everything I failed to give you. And if I say no, then you say no, and I find someone else, and we continue exactly as we are." Richard leaned forward. "But I'd rather continue with you, not as my employee, as my partner, building something meaningful together." Caroline thought about her life. The consulting work that paid the bills but didn't fulfill her. The small apartment that felt smaller every day. The future that stretched before her like an empty road. She had always wanted to make a difference, to help people, to leave the world better than she found it. And here was her father offering her the resources to do exactly that, but on his terms, in his world, under his shadow. "No," she said. Richard's face fell. "No, not the way you're offering it. I won't work for you. Won't be another employee following your orders." She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city she was learning to call home. "But I'll work with you, as an equal, making decisions together, building something that belongs to both of us. That's not how I typically operate." "Then learn a new way." Silence stretched between them. Father and daughter. Two stubborn people who had spent years refusing to bend. Then Richard laughed. A genuine sound. Something she hadn't heard since childhood. "You really are my daughter. Unfortunately. I'll have Thomas draw up partnership papers, 50-50, equal authority. 60-40. I'm the one doing the actual work. 55-45. I'm still providing the funding." Caroline turned from the window, extended her hand. "Deal." Richard shook it, firm, professional, but something else too. Proud. "You've become remarkable, Caroline. Despite me. Despite Derek. Despite everything. Because of those things, not despite them." She gathered Lily. Prepared to leave, stopped at the door. "Thank you for coming back, for trying, for not giving up when I pushed you away." Richard nodded. Words seemed to fail him for once. "I'll see you Monday, 9 o'clock. Bring coffee. I'll bring bagels too. That's why you're the brains of this operation." She left with her daughter in her arms, walking into a future she had finally chosen for herself. Not running from the past, not seeking revenge on those who hurt her, simply moving forward, one step at a time. The request came on a Thursday. Derek wanted to meet, just the two of them. No lawyers, no monitors, no hostile witnesses. Caroline agreed, against the advice of everyone who loved her. But she needed this, needed closure, needed to look at the man who had broken her and understand why. They met at the coffee shop where they had their first date. 8 years ago. A lifetime. Derek looked different, thinner, older. The confidence that had first attracted her was gone, replaced by something hollow. He sat across from her, ordered black coffee, said nothing for a long moment. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he finally said. "I know I don't have the right." "Then why are you here?" "To apologize. Really apologize. For everything." Caroline sipped her tea, waited. "I destroyed everything good in my life," Derek continued. "You, Lily, my career, my self-respect. I threw it all away because I was scared. Scared of what? Of being a father, of growing up, of becoming the kind of man who settles down and stops running from himself." He stared into his coffee. "My father left when I was 7, just walked out one day and never came back. My whole life I've been terrified of turning into him. And then I did something worse. I abandoned you when you needed me most." Carolyn listened, processed, understood. But understanding wasn't forgiveness. "You cheated on me before we were married," she said. Emily Hartman. Did you love her? Derek's face went pale. You know about Emily? I know about everything now. I didn't love her, not really. I was just scared of commitment, of forever, of not being good enough. And Vanessa? Same thing. Different face. He looked up, met her eyes for the first time. I don't know how to be happy, Caroline. I don't know how to stay with someone without looking for the exit. I'm broken. I've always been broken. She thought about her own brokenness, the years of self-doubt, the nights wondering what she did wrong, the endless questions without answers. I spent months blaming myself, she said, thinking I wasn't pretty enough, interesting enough, exciting enough, that if I had just been better, you would have stayed. It was never about you. I need you to know that. You were perfect. You gave me everything. I just didn't know how to accept it. The words landed somewhere between relief and anger. She had needed to hear them, but they came too late to change anything. I wasted 7 years trying to make you happy, Caroline said. Trying to be enough. Trying to fill a hole that was never mine to fill. I know. That wasn't my job. It was yours. I know that too. They sat in silence. Two strangers who used to be lovers. Two people connected forever by a child they had made. What do you want, Derek? Really? To be part of Lily's life. Not to take her away from you, just to be there. To watch her grow, to try to be the father I never had. You have supervised visits. I want more. I want to take her to the park, read her bedtime stories, be there for her first day of school. His voice cracked. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Caroline thought about Lily, about what she needed, what she deserved. A father who showed up, even a flawed one, even one who had to earn back every ounce of trust. I'll talk to my lawyer. We can revisit the custody arrangement. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Lily. I understand. She stood to leave. Derek reached for her hand, stopped himself. Will you ever forgive me? He asked. Carolyn considered the question. The man she had married. The man he had become. The man he might be someday. I don't know, she said honestly. But I hope so. For Lily's sake. And for mine. She walked out of the coffee shop. Into the cold afternoon air. Into the rest of her life. Her car was parked 3 blocks away. She walked slowly. Processing. Breathing. Feeling. At the corner, she stopped. Sat down on a bench. Watched the world move around her. People hurrying to appointments, couples holding hands. Children laughing at something their parents couldn't see. Normal life happening all around her, while she sat still and tried to understand what she felt. Not angry anymore, not sad, not even relieved, just finished. The chapter was closed. The story was over. Derek Matthews was part of her past, a mistake she had learned from. A lesson she would never forget. But he didn't define her anymore. She did. Caroline sat on that bench for almost 20 minutes, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, feeling the cold air against her cheeks. Then she stood up, walked to her car, drove home to her daughter. Because that was what mothers did. They kept moving, they kept building, they kept showing up, no matter what. 1 year later. Caroline woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of Lily babbling in the next room. 33 years old, a mother, a business partner, a survivor. She had changed so much in the past year that she barely recognized the woman she used to be, the one who stayed silent when she should have spoken, who accepted less than she deserved, who measured her worth by another person's attention. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. The birthday party was small, just the people who mattered. Jenna arrived first with a bottle of champagne and a gift she wouldn't let Caroline open until everyone was watching. Her mother flew in from Phoenix, looking healthier than she had in years. Richard brought balloons and a suspiciously large wrapped box. And David, quiet David with his kind eyes and patient smile. The man she had met at a foundation event 3 months ago. The one who listened more than he talked, who remembered every small detail she mentioned, who had waited for her to be ready instead of pushing. They weren't serious yet, just beginning. But for the first time in years, Caroline felt something that had nothing to do with obligation or security. Hope, pure and simple, and terrifying. "Open mine first," Jenna demanded. "I've been holding this in for 3 weeks and I might explode." The gift was a photo album. Pictures of Caroline and Jenna through the years. College roommates, bridesmaids, coffee dates, crying sessions. All the moments that made up a friendship strong enough to survive anything. The last page held a note in Jenna's messy handwriting. "You deserved better. You found it. I'm so proud of who you've become." Caroline hugged her best friend tight, no words necessary. Her mother gave her earrings, simple, elegant, something to mark this new chapter. David gave her a book, poetry by Mary Oliver, dog-eared at all the pages about beginnings and becoming, and the courage to start again. "I didn't know what to get someone who already has everything," he said. "I don't have everything. You have enough. The rest is just decoration." She kissed him, gently, in front of everyone, not caring who saw. Richard waited until the others had dispersed to the kitchen. Then he handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document. The trust fund for Lily. Established, funded, irrevocable. "This is too much," Carolyn said. "It's not nearly enough." Richard looked at his granddaughter playing on the floor. "I missed your childhood. I won't miss hers. You know money isn't what she needs from you." "I know, but it's a start." He paused. "There's something else. In the envelope." She looked deeper, found a smaller paper, a handwritten note. "I was wrong about everything that mattered. The company, the priorities, the choices I made. But the wrongest thing was leaving you, leaving your mother. Thinking success could replace love. It can't. It never could. You have taught me that, these past months, watching you rebuild, watching you become the woman I always knew you could be. I am proud of you, more than I know how to say. Your father." Caroline read the words twice, folded the paper carefully, put it in her pocket where she could feel it all night. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for letting me back in." Lily crawled toward them, pulled herself up on Richard's pant leg, reached for the ceiling like she could grab the light itself. "She's going to be a climber," Richard said. "She's going to be whatever she wants." "That too." The party wound down as the sun set. Guests drifted home with hugs and promises to call. The apartment grew quiet. Caroline stood at the window. The same view she had stared at 1,000 times over the past year. The same city. The same lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness. But everything else was different. She remembered standing in this exact spot the night Derek left, feeling like her life was over, feeling like she would never be whole again. She had been wrong. The breaking hadn't destroyed her. It had revealed her, stripped away all the pretense and people-pleasing and fear, left nothing but the truth of who she actually was. Strong, capable, worthy of love. She had always been those things. She had just forgotten. Let other people convince her otherwise. Never again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Happy birthday. I hope this year brings you everything you deserve." She stared at the message for a long moment. Thought about all the feelings it might once have stirred. Anger, sadness, confusion. Now there was only distance, the healthy kind, the kind that allowed compassion without closeness. She typed a reply. "Thank you. I hope you find what you're looking for." Then she put down the phone, walked to Lily's room, watched her daughter sleep. The baby's face was peaceful, untroubled, unaware of all the chaos that had surrounded her birth. She would grow up in a different world than Caroline had, one where her mother was strong, where her grandfather's was present, where she was loved not as an obligation, but as a choice. "I'm going to tell you stories someday," Caroline whispered, "about how you came into this world, about the darkness and the difficulty and the people who let us down." Lily stirred slightly. Her tiny hand opened and closed. "But mostly, I'm going to tell you about the light, the people who showed up, the strength we found together, the way we turned endings into beginnings." She leaned down, kissed her daughter's forehead, breathed in that baby smell that wouldn't last forever. "You're going to be amazing, Lily Matthews, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." She walked back to the living room. The window still showed the city, still showed the life waiting outside. But now she saw it differently. Not as a woman who had survived betrayal, not as a victim who had been saved, as herself, fully, completely, for the first time in her life. The revenge had been sweet, watching Derek fall, watching his lies unravel, watching the consequences finally catch up with him. But standing here now, watching her daughter dream, she knew the truth. Revenge wasn't what healed her. Freedom was. Freedom from needing someone else's validation. Freedom from measuring her worth by another person's attention. Freedom from the prison she had built around herself with fear and doubt and not enough. The prison door had been unlocked all along. She had been her own warden, and now, finally, she was free. Caroline smiled at the city lights, at the darkness that had become beautiful, at the future that stretched before her like a gift waiting to be opened. "Thank you, Derek," she whispered, "for leaving, for showing me who you really were, for giving me a reason to finally become who I was supposed to be." She turned off the living room lights, walked down the hall to her bedroom, lay down in the bed that had once felt so empty. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like enough, because she was enough, had always been enough, and finally, beautifully, painfully, wonderfully, she knew it. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever faced betrayal and found your way back to yourself, let me know in the comments. Your story matters too. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of strength, survival, and starting over. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their darkest chapter doesn't have to be their last. And if you're still here, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. Closing statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring meaningful lessons and inspiration to your life. Every word was crafted with purpose. Every emotion was designed to remind you of your own strength, because you deserve stories that matter, stories that heal, stories that help you believe in new beginnings. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.